But we're so happy that you've been able to join us. We're going to have a great time. It's always a fun time of learning and sharing, networking and connecting. We are a bunch of people that believe that Agile is a way of life, that they've been able to enhance the way that we work, whether in a big way or a small way. So we decided to collectively come together and host this free meetup for all of you. So moving along, I just want to remind everyone that we are currently recording. If you miss any part of this particular meetup, or if you want to see any of our previous meetups from the previous sessions, we do have a YouTube page where you can view our rebroadcast. And that leads us to networking. At any time during this event, I want to encourage each and every single one of you to post your LinkedIn, post your contact in their group chat. You never know who you're going to meet. At the end of this session, I'm going to be able to give everyone opportunities to maybe voice if there are any open roles, or if there's anything in particular that you want to bring to anyone's awareness, so that you can connect with other people to be able to give them jobs or opportunities to shadow, or whatever that may be, because networking is the strength of this community. And that leads us to all the different ways in which you can contact with us. Just because this group is taking a little bit of a break does not mean that we're running away from you. You can find us on Meetup at the Agile GTA. You can find us on LinkedIn, again, under Agile GTA. Our Instagram page, which is pretty popping, again, under Agile GTA. And all of our rebroadcasts will be on YouTube under Agile GTA. So you can never forget who we are and what it is that we do. And I encourage you to keep connecting with us. So I also want to introduce to you this awesome team. This team has been through all the different seasons and have made the Agile GTA what it is right now. So I want to introduce you to Praise, who's a Scrum Master, our friend Mo, who is a Product Manager, Ankar, who's a DevOps Engineering Manager. We also have Kola, who's an Agile Project Manager. And then of course, there's myself. I'm Andrea, and I'm an Agile Practice Manager.
All of this. Senior Manager, Data Strategy and Transformation, Senior Manager, Business New Lines, Senior Manager, Product Owner, Self-Broker and Digitization. He's also held an analyst role at TSX, which is the Toronto Stock Exchange. Prior to TSX, he was at Chubb Insurance, where he was a Senior Planning and Treasury Analyst. He attained his finance degree at Ryerson University, mild stomping alma mater. And in 2007, he attained his CPA. On a personal note, I've known him for about 20 years, and I still don't know how to spell his name because those that know him only use his first initial. He's vegetarian and a pretty good cook. Those of you that follow him on Instagram can see his tasty, colorful concoctions. He's a pretty good skier. We've tackled Blue Mountains and Tremblant recently. A family man and dad. So sorry, all you single ladies out there this evening that have joined us tonight. But I'm sure he's going to touch on that part of his life a little bit more in the evening. And to end, during the presentation, feel free to ask any questions by raising your hand or writing them in the chat window. And without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dinesh D. Bhavsar.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Let me just quickly share my screen. I do have a few slides for everyone. Let's just get back up here quickly. So thank you, I appreciate this. Thanks for inviting me, Andrea and Mo, to this event. I'm very happy to speak to all of you. And like Mo said, feel free to please just stop me and ask any questions you have. But I am looking to walk you through a little bit about myself, my journey in business transformation from a career perspective. I'm hoping there's some nuggets for you there as well. Some lessons that I've learned over my time, both at Aviva and overall in my career. And then also focus a little bit on data governance and why it's so important in the data world and the world that we're in now with being so data centric. It's so fundamental. So I will spend some time on that as well. So a little bit about myself. I am a husband, married to my high school sweetheart. I have two kids, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old daughter. My daughter's, I think, going on 15 already, the way she conducts herself. So she's a handful. But I've had 15 plus years now in business transformation, everything from strategy to a product owner role to now data and data governance. I am driven by making real, material, meaningful change in an organization. That's really what my motivation is, to work hard every day. I do want to be able to leave a legacy, no matter where I'm at, and we'll speak to some of that as well in the presentation. And my personal mantra really is the fact that change is the only constant. So, adapt, learn, and continuously go with the flow, as I always say. In terms of my Aviva journey, I did start out as a business partner. And so that was leveraging my CPA and finance background, which really allowed me to, build on my partnership and relationships skills, supporting various business lines in Aviva, both from Canada and the US, which then allowed me to move into the EPMO, or our project management office, where I was the senior manager for the accounting team, as well as the project management team. So this is where we looked at how we can effectively execute our projects. So the focus was on what we're executing and how we're going to execute. So again, we dived into Agile practice, and we launched that as well in Aviva some time ago. And also focus on demand and supply management. So as I'm sure all of you are aware, you're constantly being pulled into different projects. And so demand and capacity planning was very critical in delivering an effective portfolio. We had a 50 million plus budget, roughly 30 to 40 projects at a go at any given time. And so that was very integral. So that then led me to business transformation. So I was focusing on the what, but I really wanted to go and focus on the why. Why are we doing the things we're doing in the first place? Why are certain initiatives being approved? Why certain initiatives were not? So that allowed me to then build a long-term strategic outlook for Aviva Canada enterprise-wide. And I was the Canadian lead for our multi-year portfolio roadmap, which is a 5-year view. And that really looked at fundamentally changing the way we do business, where we want to invest our capital, and what are those strategic choices that we need to make sure that Aviva is competitive and a leading insurer across Aviva, Canada. Those of you that may not know, Aviva Canada is a P&C insurance company, so property and casualty. We insure personal business as well as commercial business. And we are currently across all of the provinces of Canada. And we are roughly the third largest insurer in Canada right now, behind Intact and Desjardins. So that's a little bit background on Aviva. So based on the transformation piece, it allowed me to then focus on actually delivering something end to end. And so the focus was then, how do we actually improve the way brokers do business with us? How do we make it less painful for them to interact with us? How do we make it a little bit more self-serve? And how do we make it current and relevant? So the focus was to get away from paper-based transactions to more digital solutions. So I was the product owner for our digitization program, which allowed us to build and implement a digital solution for our brokers. And that allowed a front-end solution for them to submit quotes, make any policy changes, and basically have self-serve capability built in. And that was an integral part of our digital strategy that Aviva is on now. And that was our stepping stone into that space. And it was a real testing ground for us. We were relatively new in the digital space, both from front end and back end. And out of that came a whole nother set of projects and a portfolio on its own that we're currently working through. So for me, that was my true legacy at that point, being able to introduce something cutting edge, something that really does eliminate complexity, improves efficiency, and really gets down to a customer model that both the brokers and our customers can relate to and benefit from. So through that experience, I was then tasked with building our data strategy, our enterprise Aviva Canada data strategy, and I was the lead for that as well. So, we had initially had 3 previous attempts at building a data strategy. All 3 times, the challenge was several, but the main challenge was that, we had IT that was leading a business strategy, which is always a challenge. We had lack of support, lack of sponsorship, funding, and overall program governance. So based on my experience, sorry. Yep.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just taking a little bit back here. When you were your hat as a product owner, when you were doing the transformation to digitization, who are your key stakeholders for that?
Yeah, so key stakeholders, of course, were our personal insurance business, which is where bulk of our broker business comes through. So the PI business lead and the owners were my key stakeholders. The broker business, of course, was also my stakeholder. So we have a whole broker distribution team that supports 1,400 brokers across Aviva Canada. So I had to work with them very closely to make sure that all their requirements were taking into account and we're actually solving the problem and not creating another problem. So combination of internal as well as external brokers.
And how is your intake managed with requirements and stories? Were you using Agile, and what was your?
So we were using Agile. I think at that point, some would argue that we're probably using mini waterfalls, right? But we were still learning and maturing that practice. But we are now end-to-end Agile in everything that we do. But at that point, it was still quite early.
Great.
So we had a full team under that program. I had roughly 30 resources between Scrum Masters, project managers, onshore, offshore resources that we managed as well, that really brought that digital solution to light. So it was quite a large team that we were working with. And of course, with offshore, we were able to turn around a lot of the dev work with our partner, our third-party partner, and that was an interesting experience as well.
So if going back to that interesting experience, what would you say was one really big hiccup or hurdle that you recall in that transformation project that you kind of comes out of, oh yeah, that was a learning?
Yeah, I think communication was the most important. It's one thing to capture requirements, I think, and build these user stories. We have Jira as our Agile tool, I guess, that allows us to track user stories and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it really just comes down to clear communication, being able to talk to someone sitting beside you. The operating model that we actually were then able to implement was a pod structure. So even though in the traditional sense, I guess we weren't playing the true Agile execution model, we had teams scattered throughout, and there were conflicting priorities, of course. So we then eventually moved to a pod structure where we had dedicated teams, in their dedicated space that allowed for collaboration and that immediate communication and feedback. So we didn't have to really wait, overnight cycle to look at some of the results and then make the tweaks. So I think that was critical for us.
Yeah, that's where Agile helps, right?
Yeah. So that was very helpful. Awesome. Yeah. So happy to take any other questions if there's anything in the chat. No. Yeah. So then data strategy was critical. So I was tasked to solve that problem. And the challenge there was, again, we had an organization that was using all kinds of data, but never actually weaponizing data, right? Siloed approach in terms of how data is being mined, where it's being stored, how it's being managed. So there was a lot of inconsistency, which resulted in far more complexity. And so this allowed us to just sort of bring a cohesive enterprise view on how data needs to be managed in the organization. So again, working with various stakeholders across the business, we were able to build that strategy out. We had a multi-year roadmap that we've built out that we're executing against right now. We secured funding. We also secured our chief data officer. So it was very important to us to have one central individual or function that actually owned data versus having it scattered throughout the organization. And we have very broad spectrum of users, right? So we have someone from a frontline management side where they just want to see a visualization of a report or a dashboard, to data science and machine learning, who are far advanced users of data and then how data is being mined and so forth. So because we have such a broad spectrum, we had to tailor the strategy and the roadmap to address all the needs. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is really elevate the data literacy in the organization, so people actually understand what data means, what data really is, versus throwing, big buzzwords out, including big data, for example. And that's been a challenge in the past. So we're working really hard in implementing a model that not only looks at the sexy front end data science and the analytics world, but also the pipeline that really supports a true data-centric organization. So everything from looking at technology and tools, building a strong talent bench, and also the processes that support that, right? So I was able to secure that. We secured the CDO, who's now onboarded and now my team reports into, which then led me to focus on the data governance. So as you can see, my background's obviously not data, nor am I a data engineer, data architect, but I have a finance background. So the area that we wanted to really leverage was all the experience that I have had and all the different turns that I've taken in Aviva. Where do I want to focus my attention? And data governance is so foundational, so fundamental to any organization, that data-centric organization specifically, that it was a good place for me to go and solve that problem. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But essentially, the data governance function, and maybe in your organization, you probably see as well, is typically an afterthought, especially when it comes to projects and when they're being delivered. In the process, you need to engage data governance before you go to release management, at least in Aviva Canada. So it's always been thought of as a governance function, as a hurdle or a step towards going live, versus a partner and actually understanding why the function is important. So we really focused on the value proposition of the data governance function and what we bring to the table. So we've made changes to our operating model, where now we're moving away from a tick box exercise to more of a business partner, and looking at how we can actually build requirements into the project delivery plan upfront versus at the end, making sure at the end of the day we protect data, right? Protect Aviva data, protect our data assets, and at the end, and ultimately protecting our customers.
AD, I think there's a question.
For sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, how do you pronounce your name? It's
Dinesh. Yeah.
Dinesh. Okay,
Yeah,
Dinesh. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dinesh. That was interesting to hear. From the product outlook, I want to understand what's the pinnacle that from the product you would have product roadmap. What's the pinnacle? What are you looking to reach at the end of the product? What's one thing that we see or you see the product want to do for the stakeholders?
So in the product owner role, you mean?
That's right.
Yeah. So if I go back to that digital product, right? So at the end of the day, what we were trying to do was build self-serve capability for our brokers. So that required a front-end solution, right? Where it was a web-based application that allowed them to go in, register themselves as a broker, register their office and so forth, and do a lot of the admin stuff in terms of bringing on new humans, let's say, in their broker office. But it also allowed them to create new quotes, submit new quotes, submit changes to existing policies, and either end policies or what have you, ask questions. There was a whole section for training, so they can actually understand the different products that Aviva has or different products that are coming in the pipeline, wording. So it was really like a one-stop shop for brokers to understand and navigate and interact with Aviva. everything from quotes to managing their policies. And that was our end product. If that
And
helps.
they would train to use that product at the end.
Yeah, exactly. So we had a whole change management strategy that we built out and communication strategy. Initially, we rolled out to Ontario and into a small broker group, what I would call friendly brokers that are digital already and have digital capability. And then we start rolling out to the broader community. Now, of course, not every broker has the digital capability. Some of them are very small mom and pop shops, and they don't have the technology infrastructure to support that sort of engagement. And so they remained in the legacy world because, of course, at the end of the day, they are brokers and they're working on Aviva products. But where we have the larger brokers like Marsh and Aon and so forth who have the technology and obviously the spend, this was a material improvement for them when they have large offices across Canada.
Thank you, Dinesh.
No worries. So yeah, so I mean, in terms of data governance, like we said, so we refreshed our data operating model. We also looked at refreshing and elevating the skill sets in our talent. So we upskilled some of our resources. The challenge we found was that we had resources that were very process driven and really unable to adapt and change to how we want to be able to operate. So in some instances, we were able to upskill them, bring some of that technical capability that we were lacking. So data engineering background, data architecture background, risk and control framework background. So we brought new talent on board to support that, which then, of course, elevates our value, right, in terms of how we discuss and what we ask and challenge the business and projects in terms of how they execute their projects. So we made changes there. We also introduced a robust fit for purpose operating model and engagement model. So this allowed all projects to basically have a fit for purpose engagement. So not everything required a full engagement like we had in the past, where they had documents after documents after documents to fill out, because again, it was part of a checklist. Now what we do is we have an intake form that allows us to assess what the project is, what the data elements are within that project, and what the degree of engagement we need to have. So if you consider, for example, a project that is, let's say, introducing a new coding application, and you're going to be collecting all this data from the user. Clearly, there's a heavy data element to it, right? Everything from how the data is going to be landed, where it's going to be landed, how we're going to secure that data, how long we're going to hold that data, does it have personal identifiable information, so PII, and all those requirements then get built into the program delivery plan. And like they get assigned user stories and timelines, and then we work with them in the various sprint plans to make sure that those requirements are met before they go live. What we had done in the past was, here's a form, please fill this out just before you go live. And then if we have a problem, we then become a roadblock. And that's what we want to avoid. So now we're far more engaged upfront. We're also part of our project management office's intake process. So we get to hear right off the bat, new projects that are coming in the pipeline that are not even approved, but at least what business is thinking. And that allows me to basically manage my resources and where I need to allocate the effort. So that engagement's been working really well. Like I said, anything that has data element, we then get involved and we work with them to make sure those requirements are met. We work very closely with all our other governing bodies. So data privacy is very critical to this, especially if there's PII information involved in a project. Info security gets involved heavily as well when there's data transfers and acquisition and so forth involved. And then risk and control also get involved based on the magnitude of the data and how we're handling. So it's been very fruitful, the operating model that we have implemented, and we continue to improve. I can pause here for any questions as well on that. Otherwise, I will move into data governance.
Yeah, I had another question.
Sure.
On you touched on you work closely with your information security team as well. What's that engagement model look like? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, so what we do is, so basically our process involves a data impact assessment. So we call that a DIA. And that involves sitting down with the project team and understanding, again, exactly how and what data is being handled through that project or being touched through that project, everything down to a data element level. So we get a good understanding of the data model, what the patterns are in terms of how they're going to acquire that data, where it's going to be landed, how it flows through the system. So essentially data lineage and data maps. And then through that, we need to make sure that there's appropriate controls in place. So that's where info security gets involved, making sure that either, what is the right pattern for landing the data, whether it's, CSV file or SFTP or what have you, where it's being stored, as more and more things move to cloud, there's more governance around that as well, versus on-prem. So they have their requirements from an IT perspective to make sure that data is protected, secured throughout its life cycle. And we make sure that those controls are in place. So once we get the sign off from info security, we get a sign off from data privacy if there's privacy related data in there, and myself from data governance, then a project is then able to go live. But we work with them throughout their sprints.
Do you find that privacy and security, are they under one umbrella or are they mutually exclusive?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So info security is separate altogether. It sits under IT, and right now for Aviva, at least it sits under data loss prevention team. So that's cybersecurity and security breach team. Typically in other markets, Aviva markets, we have data privacy and data governance that actually sit under the same umbrella. It's just here in Canada, it sits differently. Data privacy sits under legal because it has a legal aspect to it from legislation perspective, data privacy legislation perspective. So PIPEDA is the regulator in Canada that manages all privacy laws. And so because of that, it sits under our legal framework. And then data governance right now sits under the office of the CDO.
So,
but typically it is together in most organizations.
Together, yeah. It's funny because the reason why I asked was with Walmart Canada, we had them amalgamated at one point, privacy and security, and then we just recently branched them separate because privacy is more of a legal component, and then that back and forth kind of needs to happen a little bit more frequently.
Yeah,
InfoSec is more on the technology and the architecture and not solutioning, so it actually works better as a model.
Yeah, exactly. So I've seen InfoSec separate, but I have seen privacy and data governance under the same umbrella, at least in all our other Aviva markets.
Perfect. Thanks, bud.
Cool. You have another question? Ankar, go ahead.
Yeah. So Dinesh, I would like you to give me, for the folks for the folks who don't know what big data is, I think most of them know, but who are new to big data, could you give an example, a simple example of the data that you collected and what tools or, how you collected that data, and then what insights were generated that kind of fed into the strategy or, to determine what should be the priorities for next year? That was if you
Sure.
could, yeah.
So I'll maybe generalize a bit. So part of our data strategy was to make sure that we deduplicate and reuse, right? So that was our fundamental guiding principle. How do we deduplicate? And so part of that was big data. So we created an enterprise data hub, which is sitting on our Hadoop platform. And so that's where all our data needs to sit. And that's several reasons. One is, one source of the truth, right? So from a data governance perspective, everyone is accessing data from one place. Other is then you can actually leverage through volume and scale on the analytics side. So all our data, third party as well as internal data, gets landed in our enterprise data hub. We then tacked on a post ingestion layer that allows us to take all that raw data and translate it into more of a business form. So, and curate it into more business form. So for example, if you have policy data, GWP is our gross written premium, which is basically revenues in insurance industry. You land all that in Hadoop in our data lake. But you want to be able to extrapolate that out into what is true policy premium. So you create this new ingestion layer that allows us to split that out and roll up the raw data into domains like policy, customer domain, so forth. We then roll that up, and then we layer on top of that data marts. So now we are building out all our different data marts. We have a personal insurance data mart, finance data mart, commercial insurance data mart, claims data mart, which then build the analytical components into that and KPIs and what have you, and allows the business to access that to then build all their analytical reports and their visualization reports. So again, the idea is to deduplicate as much as possible, make sure we have sound engineering practices, data engineering practices in place, a good fundamental architecture, that design that supports that, and then everyone has the same source of the truth. That's basically the biggest challenge for us, because everyone was basically landing data in their own way, in their own little environments. Some had data sitting in Excel files with thousands and thousands of rows of information, unprotected, sitting on a shared drive that everyone had access to, and sometimes had customer data, right? And you're just like, oh my God, how are you keeping all this on a public, internal, but public shared drive? So there's a lot of controls that were not being met. And at the end of the day, we just weren't securing our data appropriately. So now you have a more structured, centralized place for anyone to get data, obviously access controlled and so what have you, and then be able to utilize that for analytics and what have you. So I don't have a specific example because I want to go into like any of those, but I mean, it applies to anything you want to land, right? So third-party data, what have you. I can talk about a case where we recently had, and this is why data governance actually is so important. And this is where we had a data science employee, a new hire, recently to Aviva Canada, who essentially uploaded 60,000 rows of customer data onto an unauthorized third-party website. Now, this was an analytics website, so it was controlled, it was restricted in terms of the access and what you could do with it. But at the end of the day, he was able to upload that. So through internal controls and the review with the manager was able to catch that and therefore bring it down, immediately delete that. They also, took access away from the employee. They worked with the vendor to make sure that, it was permanently deleted and no one had access to that data. But the fundamental issue here was around data governance, right? How do we manage data? How do we handle data, especially customer data, when it's so sensitive that we don't upload into unauthorized areas? And there's real purpose for it. So some of the key areas for data privacy in our legislation is around purposeful use of data and the lawful use of data. You can't just collect data for the sake of data. You got to have a business use for it, but you also have to have a legal use for it. And anything that you do has to have those two components. So whether you're uploading to a third party, there's got to be a purpose for that. Because this vendor was not authorized, we have no idea what their controls are, how they secure data, if it's open source or not, who had access over that 24-hour window, were they able to then, download that data elsewhere? In this case, luckily, nothing had happened. They were able to check all their logs and confirm that. But these are all risks, right? And projects and data science specifically, they're very focused sometimes on timelines and getting things done, that they don't take a step back to just think about, okay, what am I actually doing with this data? Because it's so critical and it is an asset to the organization. You can't put it at risk. And that's why it's so important that we have data privacy and data governance controls in place to make sure those things don't happen. But that's a really good example that kind of brings it, and very recent as well. So, in terms of career-wise, I'll just step back a little bit. Some of the key lessons I've learned is really, and hopefully it helps all of you as well, just, take every role as an opportunity to learn and develop. There's so much that you can grow from, taking those left and right turns. Be curious, challenge the status quo, and ultimately that's what's going to allow the organization to change and be that driver of change. Prepare yourself, whether it be through technical designations, forums like this where you learn and enrich your knowledge, and be able to adapt to circumstances. And at the end of the day, leave a legacy, right? Leave your mark on the organization, leave your mark on your career. So at the end of the day, when you do sit back and rock in that rocking chair, you kind of sit back and be like, oh yeah, I remember I did this and I did that, and I'm glad, and I was able to make my mark. So in terms of data governance, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but really we've talked about this already, right? So the goal of our function is really to manage data as a strategic asset. We want to make sure that data is usable, it's accessible to all the individuals across the organization, and at the end of the day, it's protected. There's large volumes of data that we deal with. A lot of it is highly critical data, sensitive data, customer data. So we just need to make sure we protect that and we use it appropriately. We obviously want to improve data quality. So data governance is fundamental to improving data quality and standardizing. So again, going back to one source of the truth and those data marts, we want to build standard corporate KPIs, for example. So anyone that wants to track the business and how it's performing knows exactly what that KPI is, what the definition is, what the purpose is, and what that calculation is, the formula. What we've seen in the past is, the use case that we had when we initially did the data strategy, we took frequency, which is one of our KPIs. And I went around the business and talked to a bunch of people, and I came up with 6 different answers as to what frequency was for that specific period. And that was the big aha moment for our senior leadership team to say, no wonder I don't understand the reports that come to my desk, because every other day there's a different definition or a different number for this. So we want to standardize that as much as possible so we can improve data quality and also minimize all the data management costs that come with it. We want to be able to equip our analytics team so they make sound, timely decisions on good quality data versus anecdotal data. Let the facts speak for itself, essentially. But we also want to balance the regulatory requirements. So we talked about PIPEDA, we talked about all the other regulation that is within Canada as well as group with GDPR, for example. That does pose operational risk for the organization. So we want to make sure that we have good controls and risk and control framework in place that minimizes that as well. Any questions on this?
I have a question. So you've talked a lot about data with your customers, the business, and so forth. How do you, I guess maybe let me take a step back. Do you collect data internally as far as productivity or how we operate as an organization? And to what level do you use that in order to improve the business internally?
Yeah, for sure. So our data sources, data assets are both external and internal. So if I look at, for example, from a project perspective, a little while back, we used to have HP's project management portfolio system, HP PMM, something like that, which tracked all the hours, for example, that individuals worked on particular projects, right? So we were collecting all this data. So everyone's logging their hours, timesheets are being approved, and project managers are approving these things. There's chargeback models in place, and so forth, the whole process. But we didn't know where it was actually landed. So we figured out a central place to land all that. We tacked on a data visualization tool. So ClickSense, for example, is the tool that we use. Business Objects is the other one as well. And then we were able to then actually get some analytics out of that, right? So I had done essentially, when I was back in that senior manager role, an Excel version of that that allowed me to track the demand and capacity of all our resources in the PMO office, as well as our forecast based on timelines, the schedule, and the workload and so forth. But that's a good example of in-house data that's available that really allows us to, flex our EPMO resource pool. So we went from a very heavy internal headcount for project managers, BAs, project coordinators, to then a very flex model, and we moved away and towards more partnerships and contract based. And that was only able to happen because we had a really good reporting mechanism that allows us to anticipate that demand and bring on the right resources at the right time.
And I have a follow-up. I know I'm probably I have like a million questions. I'm gonna try not to hog the time frame so others can ask. But you mentioned earlier about how you used Agile as a vehicle in order to not only streamline processes, but I guess in your case to create transparency, have different departments collaborate, so on and so forth. What was the biggest lesson that you've learned during that transition? With other organizations like the one that I work with that is starting to really ramp up their Agile transformation and adaptation, what is something that you could say, I wish we did that a little bit better?
I think training is probably where we still struggle. So we also have an Agile coach and a team that focuses on that. But I think the challenge we found is that, and like I said before, right, we were saying we were Agile, but I think we were just doing mini waterfalls, right? So we weren't truly in that sense. And to everyone, they kind of walked around and said, "Oh, we're cutting edge, we're Agile." But I'm like, do you really actually understand what it is? So I think training was the biggest piece, and then we did ramp up that. So now, like I said, we have a whole team that focuses on coaching and bringing up to speed. We have product owner certifications, we have Scrum Master certifications in-house that people go through. Minimum requirement if you're on projects now to go through that training and make sure you level set everyone. So I think that's been the biggest challenge and the biggest learning. I apply it to now my team. So we do daily stand-ups, so I'm just, it's kind of just taking some nuggets from the overall practice and see how you can apply to your day-to-day. We don't do projects, but I still have daily stand-ups with my team, and we have a huddle, and we kind of talk about, roadblocks and things that I need to get involved in and things that they can handle on their own. So there's so many different avenues of your life and in your job that you can apply the same principles from Agile. And I think that's been a real benefit, at least for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I also see someone has their hand up. I think it's Mohit.
Sorry,
You want to go
Mohit,
ahead and ask a question?
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, I wanted to understand what are some of the examples of metrics that can be used to track data governance impact on business?
Good question. So benefit tracking is obviously very important. It helps with continued sponsorship and funding. So the areas that we kind of focus really on are on data quality. So we have a data quality program where we have data quality metrics that we have now baselined. And then we work with the business to improve data quality in various areas. So something, for example, as a sense of dimension data quality is around completeness. So is a field empty or actually filled out, for example? And should it be empty and is it optional or a requirement? So we work with the business to say, okay, you know what, here we ran a report. If we look at new business that's coming in and all the data fields within that new business form, 60% of that is actually complete. Is that good or not? And sometimes the business says, yeah, that's good enough for us. That meets our threshold. Or some will say, yeah, you're right, that doesn't actually help us at all and we need to improve. So then the metrics kick in and we actually show that improvement in the data quality. So that's one example. The other piece we also use is our risk and control framework. So we have various controls that data governance owns, is responsible for. And that goes everything down to putting in best practices and rolling out the principles and all that. So based on how our controls are doing, we do assessment, quarterly assessment our controls. And that's also another measure of demonstrating that the data governance practice is actually working effectively if we remain in green or in tolerance versus moving anything out of tolerance. So those are a couple of metrics that we use.
No, okay, thank you.
Okay, there's another hand up.
Yeah, Dinesh. So I'm curious to know, you told us that you had no data background. That's right. So from that stage coming on to now, you're talking about you're using the jargon. So you're the head right now. What was the challenge and how did you cope up with coming into the data? I mean, understanding how to work in this.
Yeah, so I think so there's a couple of things I think I'm able to leverage well. And one is my versatility, right? And so the experience helps me demonstrate that in terms of picking up something new, running with it. I'm also the one that, like I said, is curious and challenging the status quo. So that allows me to bring that new insight in without knowing data and understanding the whole data background. Like some of it is just very simple, like, where is this report coming from? Where are you getting the data from? Oh, well, what about this other database? What about that place? Why is it sitting in different places? So just taking a simple approach, I think helped a lot as well, because that just allowed everyone to kind of be like, oh yeah, you're right. Let's just take a step back and think about it. But in addition to that, I also then took a data management certification as well. And I'm going through that right now to just kind of get the technical background. But partnering well, building those relationships with data architects, data engineers, really understanding how their role is, how, what they do on a day-to-day basis really helped a lot. I also referenced Dhamma, which is basically the Bible for all data management. And so I've gone through that course as well. So you have to just kind of, like I said, adapt and prepare. I knew I was going to get into a space. I enjoy it now a lot. So how can I continue to grow? And a lot of it is just around asking simple questions, and you'll be surprised as to how a simple question can lead to so many different avenues, and taking a step back. So
in other words, don't despise the days of small beginnings.
exactly. Be humble. I lead by vulnerability. I have a team of 4 right now. We have 2 vacancies, so I can also talk about that. I think you mentioned earlier about new hires, so we are actively recruiting, but we can talk about those roles. But like I said, I surround myself with the experts, so they know what they're doing in their domain. I have a data quality manager that has that background. I've got another manager who has SQL coding background and a data architecture background. So I think that helps. And like I said, you lead by vulnerability, right? So don't act like you know it all. Ask the right questions, but it's your job to really provide that vision and purpose and guide them through. So that's worked out so far for us.
Well, I think we have another question. Go ahead.
Another question here.
Sorry, I'm just part of a data governance team. That's why I have another question. I
Oh,
wanted to understand, as data governance is a continuous improvement process, right?
Mhm.
As compared to being a one-time project. So I wanted to understand how can the importance of data governance be communicated well to the business stakeholders,
Yeah.
and how they can be kept aligned with the governance objectives throughout the journey.
Yeah. So I mean, what really helped us was our data strategy, right? So data strategy was our starting point. And my approach has always been show the what's in it for me, the WIFM. And if you demonstrate those use cases for your senior leadership, whether it be finance or in the business, you just need to have some good, strong use cases to demonstrate that, having the right data will take your business to XYZ, right? Otherwise, it's all anecdotal. So like I said, always let the facts speak for itself. So we did a lot of use case-based scenarios. We had a war room that we initially set up. We had 2 weeks set up for a war room where we have engineers and modelers and so forth. And we had tasked our CFO basically to come down every day in the morning and ask a question, and then we would get him the answer for the end of the day. And we went through that exercise, and he was blown away with all the insight and the analytics that came out of it, because with the data that we actually have. Now, the only thing that he really needed was how to actually harness all that data. And part of that is having the data strategy and the roadmap in place, but also this whole data governance function and what it brings to the table. So we're constantly communicating to our stakeholders. Like I said here, we have our strategy on a page that we continuously work and evolve. And that's helped us so far. So we're going through our first 2 quadrants there. So data governance standards, we've established a good practice of standards and principles. We've established an operating model where we have data principals, data owners, a data council in place. We've introduced roles like data stewards. So that's basically understanding how data is being handled. And then now we're moving into more of data management, right? So making data more available, improving the data quality, standardizing corporate KPIs, and overall improving that so that people can actually make sound decisions in a timely manner. And everything that wraps around that is really around our group counterparts from data governance, working closely with data privacy, info security, and then all our partners from IT to architecture and what have you. But it's a continuous journey. Like we talked about the metrics and showing that benefit. I think that's where we win, especially when it comes to data quality and measuring that in the organization.
Yeah.